You can remove the boy from the man, but you cannot take Meccano out of the heart and the soul of the inner child. Hi, if you want even more Meccano goodness, why don't you check out my Patreon channel? And please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I post updates in the community section, not only for this week's Patreon build, but also for what I'm currently working on. Thank you, and back to the build. Hi and welcome back. Where I live, there is a hidden, forgotten history. The area hints at a past that saw commerce from Scotland to London and other major cities that dates back hundreds of years. It's in our street names, the names of our villages and small hamlets, old pubs and local place names that still exist. But their use has long since vanished from memory. Locally, even as little as 80 years ago, the transport of livestock was done by foot. Livestock was brought to local centres and then shipped by rail. But before that, it was droved or walked all the way to major urban centres. Cattle would be herded in this manner from Scotland to York and even London to be sold at markets. The reason for this was due to the geography of Britain. England is dissected by the Pennine Hills, dividing east from west, but also therefore most of our large rivers also flow towards the coast, either west to east from the Pennines to the North Sea, or east to west from the Pennines to the Irish Sea, so transport by barge is not feasible. The old roads show the remains of animal enclosures along the way. Buildings that are marked on old maps as inns also dot the roads. Names like Lead Gate, which would have originally been Lead Gate, or where the drovers would lead the livestock to. A good water source is also a common theme in these areas, along with the pub names like the Jolly Drovers, the Pack Horse, the Wool Pack, all speak of a time when animals walk to their end destination. The coming of the railways changed this, and, as like all items being transported, the need for animals to get there in good condition was important. Not only for the welfare of the animals, but also because the railways were responsible financially for their transport. In 1854, the Railway and Canal Act set this out in writing for the first time as law, as well as limiting the amount of money to be paid out for injured animals. This was set at no more than £50 per horse and £15 per head of cattle, and no more than £2 for any sheep or pigs. If you were transporting an animal of greater value, you had to declare so at the point of booking the carriage, and could expect to be billed at a higher price to offset the risk the railways took in the transportation. The Railways Act in 1921 increased the amounts to be paid out to £100 per horse, £50 per cattle, and £5 for any other animal. Animal welfare also became law for the first time when it came to the transportation of livestock in the Diseases of Animals Act 1894, which laid down the requirements of the carriage of animals, covering for the first time subjects like feeding and watering, construction of dedicated wagons, docks and gangways to be used for loading and penning of livestock, the correct methods to be used for loading any livestock, and how long any animal could be in transport for without having arrested a station. And at last, the Act contained provisions prohibiting overcrowding and other cruelty, and for penalties for breaches and orders of force. In other words, the Board of Agriculture would fine the railways. My local railway station of Black Hill was located about 200 metres from the local cattle market, where all livestock would be droved to. The cattle market building still exists, albeit now a furniture warehouse. The cattle dock for Black Hill Station was located under what is now a housing estate. It was built on the least used siding of the station and at the far end, allowing for the least stress to be imparted onto any animal beginning its journey to the main line. Railways had to comply. It was law. The rule book laid down what everybody had to adhere to. I have a copy of the rule book. It's a 1945 edition for the Great Western Railway, and there's a wonderful insight into a long-lost world. The driver had to obey Rule 110 with regards to loose shunting of wagons containing livestock. The guard of the train had Rule 171 A, B and C to adhere to when it came to the transportation of livestock. I also own a copy of Modern Railway Administration, published sometime in the 1920s or 1930s. The 2 volumes cover all day-to-day running of the railway, and for the writing of this script, it was my first point of call. From the railhead, transportation was then handled by local drovers. And at the beginning of the 20th century, with the invention of the internal combustion engine, it wasn't long before livestock was being moved by motor vehicle. The iconic image of an American pickup truck with a hog in the back being taken from one farm to another on a dirt track begins to be seen on movie screens. The mass movement of cattle by lorry didn't really begin until after World War II, with the invention of larger, more economical, articulated lorries. In Great Britain, as the rail network began to fall into disrepair, the theory of having the stock picked up at the farm and transported quickly to the final destination was more appealing and cheaper. And having to pay a drover to take it to the railhead, have the railway load and transport it to the final railhead, and then having to pay another drover to herd the livestock to its final destination. Also, as smaller branch lines were closed in the 1960s and 70s, farms no longer had access to that form of transportation. The 1950s onwards witnessed this change in practice, and with it the need to rethink and relearn new methods of caring for animals while in transport. The good working practices that had been learnt nearly 100 years before by the railways were lost, as haulage companies vied for speed and profit with seemingly little concern for the living animals they were transporting. Pack them in and ship them fast seemed to be the motto. And in time the requirement to have better designed vehicles and working regulations came into practice. These slowly became law, and the haulage industry stepped up to the game to help provide, in Great Britain, the level of professionalism they have showed to date. The Animal Health Act of 1981 began to change the laws for animals and to recognise their welfare and rights. In 2006, the Welfare of Animals, Transport, England Order was agreed and came into force in January of 2007. And all of this comes together in a fascinating document by the Humane Slaughter Association covering the requirements of transportation. Many of the points it covers are not dissimilar to those that were covered by the Railway Acts and regulations with regards to animals. But with that, veterinary training has improved over the last 100 years, with advancements in understanding the effects of stress on animals in transport. But this build would fail in Britain for the following reasons. It has no side gate attached to the loading ramp to a minimum height of 1.3 metres. The loading ramp angle is greater than 29 degrees. There are no internal partitions fitted, no foot battens and or non-slip flooring, no roof fitted to allow for protection from the environment. Come on, Meccano, Petter would have a field day with this vehicle. And joking aside, these regulations had not come into force when this model was designed, as Meccano was good at building the latest requirements into their models. But the love of random knowledge comes into effect with this build. I had no idea that the vents you see on the side of livestock lorries were designed with so much engineering. To me, they were just vents that I see closed all too often when the load is in motion, and I see fully opened at motorway services. That the issues I addressed before with this truck are around half of those that have to go into the design of a livestock transport vehicle. The 2006 Act also applies to me when I transport my cats to the vets. Other facts, like 102 shorn sheep I take is the maximum amount you can transport, can produce up to 11.9 kilowatts of heat per hour. And that a load of 23 heavy cattle produce 12.8 kilowatts, to me are just fascinating, but completely random bits of knowledge. And did you know that a milking cow requires 180 litres of water a day? And that animals have a maximum journey day of 10 to 14 hours before, by law, having to be rested for a minimum of 8 hours. In my very early childhood, the cattle market of Black Hill was still in operation to some level or other. I have no memory of it. I'm just going off what I've been told growing up. But the time of herds of livestock being driven through the town had long vanished. In the 1980s, Consett Slaughterhouse closed and the trade of livestock finished. And slowly the stories that older people tell are disappearing. Like that of a friend of mine who's sadly been gone for 3 years, used to tell of going to Consett Grammar School, that he and his friends would dawdle at certain times of the year in the hope of catching a flock of sheep being herded through Consett in the 1940s. With any luck, they would catch it on Newmarket Street, heading the wrong way down a one-way street, then onto Park Road. For the reward of 2 shillings each, they would help the drover the last half mile down to the cattle market. The park was always the place the sheep wanted to be, and the game was to make sure they never got into it. He said it was worth the birching they would receive for arriving late to school, and that his mother would only tell him off after he'd halved the payment he had received from the drover. Or the herd of cattle being driven through Shotley Bridge, that after being spooked by a loud noise had created mayhem, with one cow entering a house and climbing halfway up the stairs before becoming stuck fast in the narrow recess of the stairwell. And still now at odd times, driving the back roads of Iverston Village and Hangingstone, you will find yourself in a sea of white, your car an island as sheep are driven from one field to another, and life slows down to their pace, and your only option is to sit and wait.